So today we're going to look at a few interesting reports from think tank CD Howe.
Now, they are widely considered to be Canada's most influential think tank. The CD Howe Institute is a source of trusted policy intelligence, distinguished by their research that is nonpartisan, evidence-based, and subject to definitive expert review.
The namesake comes from Clarence Decatur Howe, who was born on January 15th, 1886, and he was an American-born Canadian engineer, businessman, and politician, credited with transforming the Canadian economy from an agriculture-based economy to an industrial one. And during the Second World War, his involvement in the war effort was so extensive that he was nicknamed the Minister of Everything.
The Minister of Everything. Hey, damn, what a cool title. But you know what's not cool, Dan? This chart that we are about to cover here.
Yeah, this thing is pretty depressing. So this was posted on CD Howe's Twitter as a graph of the week. It comes from a report that they put out a while ago, but it says Canada's happiness decline hits young people the hardest. And it basically shows the 4 different age groups. So people below 30, people aged 30 to 44, people aged 45 to 59, and people aged 60 or more. And only one of those has seen an increase in happiness in the last reading, and that was people aged 60 or more, who really haven't seen, they've seen a slight decline in happiness over the last 10 years, but not nearly as substantial as we've seen among the other groups. Age basically 30 to 59, so those 2 age categories, 30 to 44, have basically declined from, in 2013, they had the same levels of happiness, if not higher levels of happiness than people age 60 or more. And people below 30 were the same, and now they have the lowest level of happiness, followed closely by your 30 to 44s and 45 to 59. So basically everybody in the country under the age of 60 is far less happier than everybody in the country over the age of 60.
Literally just looking at this chart, I can feel happiness decreasing inside of me right now. So Canada ranks 15th on the World Happiness Index. That is in 2024, down 10 places from 2015. For those below age 30, Canada ranked 58th. Well, for those over the age of 60, it ranked 8th. So what a massive disparity there. The only countries with the worst decline in young people's happiness comparing 2006 to 2010 and 2021 to 2023 are Jordan, Venezuela, Lebanon, and Afghanistan. Once the happiest group in Canada, people under 30, are now the least happy, outpacing the decline across the rest of the population. I mean, Dan, let's just unpack this for a second. Like, what the hell is going on, man? This is like, you know, anyone from like 15 to 60 seems to just be, you know, happiness has fallen off a cliff, you know, housing, healthcare, taxes, weather. Like what is it? What's going on here from your perspective?
I think cost of living is probably the biggest one that you hear among young people. Housing, rent, and basic expenses have skyrocketed while wages simply haven't kept up. And a lot of that is, you know, people feel like they're being lied to when they hear, oh, inflation's 1.9%. And it's like, well, you're not. It's just inflation's slower now, but it doesn't mean that the inflation from the past 5 years went away. And so, you know, people are really impacted by cumulative inflation. Like prices are like 30% higher than they were at the beginning of COVID, right? From that cumulative inflation. And a lot of this is compounded in, I mean, if you can't save money because your cost of living is too high, you can't amass a down payment and you can't buy a home. And so Canada has the second worst housing affordability in the world, which makes homeownership feel like an impossible dream for many. The household debt crisis, you know, we have, like the report mentions later on, we have the highest debt to income. Youth unemployment is rising. Like the 2 biggest groups of people who are unemployed right now is young people and new immigrants, right? And then on top of that, you've got like all this economic and political uncertainty, and honestly, like a mental health crisis where our healthcare system is also not providing for people. So I think it's pretty sad, right? And also let's not forget, like The Economist ranked 3 Canadian cities as part of the top 10 most livable cities in the world. So you have, cities like Vienna, Copenhagen, Melbourne, Sydney, Vancouver, Canada is number 5 on the list. Then you have Zurich, Calgary, and Toronto, Amsterdam, and Osaka, Japan, right? Notably, 3 Canadian cities make top 10 lists, which makes the happiness decline even more striking and surprising.
Yeah, it is sad. And literally only one of those cities on that list is affordable for the average person, and that's Calgary. So this is why we have this, happiness problem here in Canada. And sure, you can live in a great city. You just have to suffer economically to do so. And, I hear this all the time living in Toronto, Dan, is, okay, I can live here. I can afford to live here, but I can't afford to do anything here. Right. So what is the point of even living in a city if you can't enjoy the city living, right? Because it's just too expensive. It's kind of like this horrible irony of, yeah, I can live here, but I'm just here, right? I'm not doing the things that I should be doing living in a city.
Yeah, you're half alive, right? You're just existing, which is really, it's like fast track to it becoming an NPC or whatever.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, because I've heard, like my cousin moved to Halifax, and she is absolutely loving it. Cam Baru from, our meetup host in Moncton moved to Moncton, and his Instagram is moved to Moncton, and he loves it. Like, there are a lot of great Canadian cities, and that is what the next report from CD Howe is we're going to talk about, is, we don't have that, like in the US. I think Sasha Kaku's talked about this when he was on the show, we don't have that thing where you're fully integrated. Like in the US, like everyone's like lived in, it's like I lived in New York and then I moved to this city and that city. And we don't like have that. You didn't grow up all over the country like you see in the US. And I don't know exactly what it is. I always have said it's either sports teams or airlines, right? Like there's more flights and there's sports teams that make every city in the country, right? So according to this recent report from Oxford Economics on the note that you're mentioning, both Toronto and Vancouver were ranked as severely unaffordable with some of the worst housing affordability metrics among global cities. And the report showed that the average home price in these cities was more than 10 times the median household income, making them some of the least affordable housing markets in the world. So the question is, what are Canadians going to do? Where can they go if they don't want to suffer this life of basically like indentured servitude, the death pledge of a mortgage, and they want to live a normal life and stay in Canada?
Yeah, well, okay, so we're going to try to answer that with this next piece from CD Howe, but I just couldn't help myself, and I had to put this next piece in here.
Yeah. This person tried to answer the question for sure.
Yeah. And now, look, you may have seen this image. I've seen it now on Reddit, on Twitter, and even Instagram now. Essentially, and now I know most of you listen to this podcast, so I'm going to try to explain it, and for those that watch on YouTube, thank you. Essentially, it's a map of Canada with a huge outline that basically covers all the territories and essentially I'd say more than half of almost each province. And the caption is, Canadians are so dumb. They complain about the housing crisis, but they have all this empty land to build cities. So we're going to read some funny comments under that I pulled from a couple different sources that were in response to this image, and then we're going to go through why we can't build houses there, and then we're going to go through the potential of some new cities in Canada. So, Dan, the first comment is, enjoy your 21-hour commute.
The next says, from Baffin Island to Churchill, all of Northern Ontario, the entirety of Quebec that isn't the St. Lawrence River to Labrador, that's the Canadian Shield. It's nothing but granite bedrock, muskeg swamp, and thick coniferous forest dotted by millions of lakes, which, to be honest, I would be very compelled to live in. But this comment says, good luck building anything on it or in it.
This next one kind of hurt, but I guess this is, again, what some of the world thinks of us here. Why does Canada complain about housing when they can just easily build more igloos?
Why don't people want to live in Canadian Siberia with an angry face emoji?
The problem is that Canada is really just 3 cities connected by a giant highway with little in between. Damn, guys, take it easy on us.
They would have to do a better job at eliminating the mosquitoes first. I would
That,
agree with that. And black flies, it's
oh
definitely a
man,
real thing. But I mean, people seem to be doing it in like Australia and Florida, where there's like, I don't know, like snakes and like crocodiles trying to kill you all the time. So, and there's mad bugs down there too.
yeah, that's true. Okay, this next one is, this person was trying to be a little clever. It might have worked. There's a lot of land up there, but do you know how much of it is habitable? None of it.
Oh, that is clever. That is clever. That's good.
Hit me with the last one here, Dad.
The last one says, Canada is obviously planning an invasion of the U.S. Why else amass so many people along the border? I mean, that's an interesting note.
Yeah, and I mean, that goes to show, again, most Canadians live, I think it's some crazy stat, like 75% or more Canadians live within 100 to 150 kilometers of the U.S. border, right? And you can see on this map that we'll post on YouTube, you can see it. It's clear. So let's keep the show going here, Dan. CD Howe also put, again, the think tank that we started off with, we're back to them. They also put a great study kind of somewhat relating to this. And we've chatted about this concept before. What if we just built new cities? And also, what even is a city? Well, the United Nations actually classifies a city as an area divided into 1 kilometer square grids. Each box is assessed to have at least 1,500 residents. If there are enough continuous boxes, the minimum density of a total population of more than 50,000 is a city. Okay, so essentially 50,000 people plus in a tight area equals city.
Yeah, and we actually did a full episode on this concept entitled The Billionaire Who's Trying to Solve a Housing Crisis, where an ex-Goldman Sachs trader had gathered a bunch of notable billionaires, and they planned to build an entirely new city in California.
Yeah, and they're trying to do the same thing in other places like Egypt. Their major city, Cairo, with a staggering 22 million people, also has major housing challenges. And that's why the government, along with private partners, is trying to build a whole new capital city just a couple of kilometers outside of this.
Yeah, and then China as well has built more than a few cities out of thin air.
But does this concept actually work? Is it possible to just build a new city, or in this case, multiple new cities? In theory, it's an urban planner's dream, right? A new utopian metro. We don't have to build around existing infrastructure, but we can have a clean, fresh start. We can put the subways and the transportation hubs and the universities all where they're supposed to be. But with all that being said, again, is this possible? Dan, read me the title of this next study put out by think tank CD Howe.
The report is titled Making Housing More Affordable in Canada, the Need for More Large Cities, from the CD Howe Institute. And in brief, the study explores solutions for housing affordability in major cities, focusing on renters and new buyers. Simply building more housing in big cities won't solve affordability, according to their research, as it attracts residents from smaller cities. The solution requires making smaller cities more attractive and larger to provide affordable housing options. This means your Halifaxes and Monktons of the world, right? This requires coordinated action across all government levels.
Yeah, see, this is a really interesting. Let's just stop here and unpack that for a second, because the pull of the big city, right? If you're in the GTA or even like the GTHA or even the greater GTHA, right? Let's draw another big circle, another donut around Toronto. A lot of people, at least when I was growing up, the goal was to get to that big city because that's where the opportunity was. That's where the fun was. That's where everything was. And I think that's a really good point. It attracts residents from smaller cities, right? The pull factor is to that big city. So how do we keep pull factors? How do we keep those smaller cities attractive, right? So now the report goes on to say that there's changes in housing affordability in Canada, and the price per square foot per occupant would be the ideal measure of housing affordability. But due to data limitations, CD Howe relies on the Terranet House Price Index. Terranet, another great institution that we have referenced numerous times on the show. Now, this index tracks market trends by measuring single-family dwelling prices while excluding renovation impacts. So Canada's housing market is not uniform, but rather a collection of distinct regional markets. While Toronto and Vancouver receive the most attention, affordability challenges affect all major urban centers.
So since 2000, Canada's major cities have seen dramatic increases in house prices. Even Edmonton, the lowest growth, is now 3 times more expensive, while Vancouver, Hamilton, and Toronto have become 5 times more expensive. Right? 5x in 25 years. After the 2008 financial crisis, low interest rates accelerated price growth across all cities, while some cities like Calgary, Quebec, and Edmonton saw income growth matching housing costs. Others like Toronto and Vancouver saw affordability decline significantly because incomes weren't keeping up. However, these income statistics don't show whether gains were evenly distributed or concentrated among existing homeowners. I think we could probably guess, right?
Totally. Now, you had mentioned this previously, Dan, Canada's debt service ratio, right? We talk a lot about this on the show, the DSCR, the debt service coverage ratio, an extremely important metric to understand in real estate. Well, the debt service isn't just in real estate. Debt service is important in all things, right? So Canada's debt service ratio, which are debt payments relative to income, remained stable for 35 years. And that was due to things like lower interest rates that were offsetting higher mortgage payments and higher mortgage principals. But recently, it has risen sharply as interest rates increased to fight inflation while house prices stayed high. And if you've been listening to this show, you know we have covered this roller coaster of inflation and interest rates and kind of the battle between the two over the last several years.
Yeah, and remember the DSCR, like you mentioned, is a crucial financial metric used by lenders and investors to assess a property's ability to generate sufficient income to cover its debt obligations. Now, this metric, as it's being used by the report here, is more for individuals' ability to service their debt, but it's calculated by dividing the property's net operating income by its total debt service, principal and interest payments. In this case, it's calculated, for the CD Howe report, it's calculated by the owner's income divided by their debt service payments, right?
Right.
For real estate investors, DSCR is important because and this is kind of, I want you to apply this thought to housing affordability, helps determine if it can generate enough cash flow to cover its mortgage payments. Lenders have minimums that they typically use to approve financing, and higher ratios would indicate stronger cash flow. Lower would be a more risky situation and higher investment risk, right?
Yeah, great point. Now, in CMHC's MLI Select program, which again, we've done multiple episodes on. If you're interested in learning more about that, I'd highly recommend going back and finding those episodes. If you are a small cap developer or a retail investor looking to get into development, please reach out. We help people across the country secure this type of debt. But when we're looking at the MLI Select program through CMHC, the DSCR is one of the key qualifying criteria. Properties with higher debt service coverage ratios can qualify for better insurance premiums and therefore more favorable lending terms. This incentivizes investors to pursue properties with strong cash flow potential and sustainable debt levels. And just an FYI, you should always be pursuing properties with strong cash flow potential and sustainable debt levels. Okay. That is, let me make that very clear. So for example, a debt service coverage ratio, a DSCR of 1.25 means that the property generates 25% more income than needed to cover its debt payments, providing a comfortable cushion for any unexpected expenses or vacancies, which we know, Dan, as we've covered in recent reports and recent episodes, vacancies are up across the country. So you need to be prepping for this.
For sure. And similarly, like the same way that CMHC uses this to examine the health of an investment, you kind of want to use the debt service ratio to examine the health of an economy. And that's what CD Howe has done here. So
yeah,
they also go further and compare house prices internationally. So data from the Bank of International Settlements shows Toronto and Berlin leading major cities in price growth. Using 2010 as a baseline, most major cities are at least 30% higher, But when comparing at the country level, we see widespread house price growth across advanced economies, with Canada showing the highest increase. And this trend is mirrored by our debt to GDP ratios.
Yeah, and to go even further, Canada is ranked poorly internationally in the ratio of after-tax disposable income to house prices. While the ratio has fallen in many other countries since 2005, Canada has actually showed the steepest decline among other comparable nations. And that's not a good thing either, right? If we're thinking after-tax disposable income, so that's, the money that you spend on vacations, or, that fun money, that rainy day account, or that sunny day account, whatever you want to call it. We've got less of that compared to house prices. So we're really watching two things go the opposite way.
And we know, and we've proposed a solution on the show. We know that increasing housing supply is often proposed as this main solution to address affordability. Focusing solely on major cities to deliver that supply might not be effective. A lot of evidence suggests that simply building more housing without proper targeting won't solve the housing crisis. And Canada's actually been doing that. We've been building a lot of houses. We've been talking about building a lot. We've been building a lot. Housing stock has generally matched population growth until recent massive increases in immigration, obviously, which have now kind of subsided back to normal levels. Despite needing to account for smaller family sizes, construction levels have been higher than commonly believed.
Now, Canada has expanded housing supply resources significantly with multiple federal programs that support construction. And we've talked a lot about this over the last few years. The construction workforce, however, this is, again, another potentially huge negative impact. The construction workforce has grown from 5% to 8% of total employment since 2000, the highest in 50 years. However, the construction is heavily concentrated in major areas, with the Toronto and Vancouver accounting for 17.5 and 12.5% respectively of housing starts, despite representing a smaller share of the population. And Dan, just on that construction piece, we've talked about this before. I can't remember, is it called something like the silver retirement, the silver exit, or something like
the silver wave? Yeah, I don't know.
The silver wave. I can't remember now. I'm going to butcher that. Apologies. But this is basically where we see tens, I believe it's, if not tens, if it's tens or hundreds of thousands of journeymen electricians.
Silver tsunami.
The silver Of course. I was
close with the wave.
You were, yeah. The small wave. Sorry, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, Canada spends more money on building houses than other countries. And this difference keeps getting bigger. And as you're mentioning, we have a growing dependency on construction workforce and older people in the construction workforce that are going to leave. And that's a big question mark. Yeah. Can that be replaced by automation? We're going to talk about it in another episode coming up about prop tech. But even when compared to other countries that have similar numbers of immigrants, like Australia, Canada spends more. Right. And I think we're going to try and get Cameron Holden on the show to talk about Australia, because he just did a crazy report about immigration and impacts and construction. And Canada and Australia are very similar side by side. So I think it'd be a cool thing to look at. But among all OECD countries, Canada puts the highest percentage of its investment money into building homes, which might surprise you, because it sounds like, the housing crisis piece is kind of like, are we doing a good job at it? But
are we doing a good job at the crisis? I think yes. Yeah. Are we doing a good job facing it? Remains to be seen, I guess.
Yeah, so it could just mean that it costs more to build houses in Canada, which wouldn't surprise me. We're pretty good at making things more expensive than they need to be. But more importantly, it tells us that we need to be smarter about where we build new homes if we want to make housing more affordable.
Yeah. Again, I guess it goes back to the number one rule in real estate, right? Location, location, location. Now, the paper goes on to ask, when does increasing supply improve housing affordability? Well, in Canada, people can freely choose where to live and to work, right? We live in a free country. So if you want to move around and get a different job, then by all means, please do so. This means that population spreads out until the benefits of living in different locations become equal. These benefits include things like amenities, jobs, wages for those jobs, housing costs, and commuting expenses, and much more. And now the model that CD Howe has put together shows how wages and housing costs change as people move between cities.